Today's story is about a super famous box that people have been obsessed with since its overwhelming demonic powers were made public. This wine cabinet has not only ruined lives, but even caused physical damage to the people who owned it before the box would then move on to a new victim. A box that torments every owner both physically and mentally, and may even go as far as killing the one who possesses it, even going as far as to enter a man's dreams and torment his very soul. An item containing a demonic power so evil that its wooden prison could not contain it no matter how many times it was locked back up. A box never meant to be opened by anyone that would repeatedly be opened by many. Today, we are talking about the horrifying tale of the Dybbuk box. Stay tuned. Hello, I'm MrLex, and welcome to the channel. If you enjoy the paranormal, dark, and spooky in the form of a story, no matter what it is, then this is the channel for you. So, if you enjoy this video, please give the like button a Chuck Norris-style roundhouse kick to the face, and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you can get all of our future uploads, as well as leave a comment with your suggestions on what topics we should cover next, because we just might do them in a future video. Now, on to the story. Being Jewish myself, this story holds a special place in my heart, as I was informed of the evil behind Dybbuks long before this story was ever told to me. Dybbuks are disembodied human spirits that, because of their former sins, must wander aimlessly until they find a human vessel to reside in and take control over. Better known to most as the Jewish equivalent of a demon in Christianity or Catholicism. The story of this box starts in 2001 with an antique shop owner from Portland, Oregon named Kevin Manis. Kevin would routinely go to yard sales and auctions to find items to restore and sell at his antique shop. And on this particular day, Kevin was at an auction for the estate of a 103-year-old Polish immigrant woman named Havale, a Holocaust survivor that had just recently passed away not long before this. Kevin found himself looking through lots of items grouped together on pallets, and in one particular lot number 29, something about the items there just really stood out to him. Something just drew him towards this particular lot, something more than just the several $100s worth of items he knew he could resell in his shop. So when lot 29 came up to the auction block, Kevin was fierce with his bidding. There were other people bidding on it, but once the bid for the lot got up to about $28, the other buyers got tired of bidding and realized that Kevin was not going to relinquish this lot to any of them. Kevin took the lot home, happy with this purchase, realizing that he had just scored a home run. Inside the box was mostly just knickknacks from the old woman that he knew he could resell, but the lot also contained a few unusual items that you wouldn't really expect to see in these types of lots, such as a sewing box and a steamer trunk, as well as one other interesting find, a small old antique wine cabinet that was sealed with a newer looking lock on the door. After purchasing the lot and seeing what he had just acquired, a voice of a young woman called out to him from behind him and said, "I see you bought the Dybbuk box." He looks up and he sees this young lady, maybe in her 20s or early 30s, and it didn't register to Kevin immediately that she had referred to his newly purchased wine cabinet as a Dybbuk box. She goes on to tell Kevin that that was what her grandmother had called it. At this point, Kevin has realized what she has said, and in his head he's thinking, "Oh, I'm Jewish, I know what a Dybbuk is. It's just a story that Jewish parents would tell their children so they wouldn't misbehave. They would say, 'Oh no, you better not do that or else the Dybbuk will get you.'" So in his head, Kevin is just laughing about what this woman just told him, and this woman then goes on to tell him that whatever they would ask their grandmother anything about the Dybbuk box, that her grandmother would just spit through her fingers 3 times like as though it was a ritual or something of the sort to ward off evil, and then she would tell her grandkids that the box was never to be opened. Upon hearing this, Kevin, being not super into his faith and viewing the concept of a Dybbuk as nothing more than a children's story, completely ignores the warnings of this young woman's grandmother and just didn't see the box as anything all that special. So he proceeds to just load it up with the rest of his stuff that he had just bought and leave to take his newfound collection back to his antique shop. For Kevin, blinded by dollar signs and not believing the story, he saw it as a good day. And now Kevin would go back to his shop with his wares, and to understand this next part, you're going to need to understand the layout of his antique shop. You see, the storefront itself was really small, only about 25 feet wide. However, it was connected to a downstairs basement, and this basement section of the store was far larger, at about 4,500 square feet. The basement was very important for Kevin because it was where his workshop was, and it was also storage where he would store items that he may or may not need to refurbish that he planned to sell when he sold his other items upstairs on the top floor when space opened. So, to organize all of his inventory, Kevin had many long rows of shelves down in the basement that held on to all of the items that he was planning to sell, and the lighting at this time was rather poor down in this basement. The only lighting that it had were these very long fluorescent bulbs, and they would often blow and need to be replaced. At the time of the event that I'm about to tell you about, when it unfurled, there were only a couple of lights currently working. The others had already blown, and Kevin hadn't gotten around to replacing those just yet. Stricken with curiosity about what might just be in the Dybbuk box, after Kevin takes his haul down to the basement, he immediately gets to work on his workbench, going and trying to pick the lock on the old wine cabinet. The way that this box was locked was with this brass hasp with a small brass padlock that had been placed on it. Kevin quickly realizes that he's not going to be able to pick this lock, and instead of cutting the lock off like he normally would have done, he instead tries to get his screwdriver and get up underneath the hasp and try to pry it off from the wood itself. After prying a bit, he does get the lock to come off, and he proceeds to open up this box, and as he does, something mechanical inside the box activates. The doors just open on their own when the lock is removed, and this extra lower drawer comes out of it as well while the doors are opening. The first thing that Kevin is thinking, though, is why would they use such a fancy level of detail on an old small wine cabinet like this that just does not look like it would deserve it? At the same time, Kevin gets this weird negative feeling washing over him that he just cannot shake, but he doesn't know what it is yet. Inside the Dybbuk box, Kevin finds some very odd items. The items include 2 pennies from the 1920s, a candlestick with a kind of fat pear-shaped body and octopus legs, a small gold wine goblet, and a small granite statue in the shape of a headstone with the word Shalom carved into it, which means peace, and it was written in Hebrew. A dried rosebud, and finally, the strangest thing of all, 2 locks of hair from 2 different people. Now, at this point, Kevin is just thinking, well, this must just be some old lady's keepsake that she held on to for sentimental reasons. He didn't give much thought to it beyond that. It might have had sentimental value to her, but it didn't to him. To him, he just thought it was a normal box. No Dybbuk had jumped out and attacked him, so he didn't think anything more of it. This would soon change. At the time, Kevin had a young woman named Jane that was working for him as a salesperson in his shop, and he thought very highly of Jane. In his words, she was absolutely a fantastic salesperson and was amazing at her job, making what happens next all the more difficult for both of them to go through. So, the day after, Kevin had left to go take care of some business outside of the shop, and he left Jane in charge of the place. And he had left the Dybbuk box downstairs on his workbench in the basement. This was not unusual, as Jane had been left in charge of the shop several other times before this, so being left alone to manage the shop was really nothing out of the ordinary for Jane. Now, Jane is completely alone in this shop, and they have not opened yet. And Jane has never had an issue with being by herself in the shop in the past. She spent several hours down in the basement of the shop several different times before this and would work in the dark and never feel anything strange or even slightly like something was wrong with the place. On this day, Jane was down in the basement doing some work before opening, and while she was working this time, she just could not shake the feeling that something down there or someone was watching her while she worked. Something that she had never experienced before. She goes and turns the lights off to go back upstairs, and suddenly, just a second later, after she walked away, the lights came right back on. She only saw this for a split second before the lights turned off again, but she did see it. Something that she had never experienced there before, and it made no sense to her because there were no other ways in or out of this basement. You either had to come through the main door from the upstairs, or you could not get in. There were no other entry or exit points. Suddenly, the phone rings and Jane answers it. "Addie's Market, how can I help you?" Jane lets out a sigh of relief. It's just her friend, Geneva, telling her that she was going to swing by later that day, and feeling relieved, Jane just said, "Alright, I'll let Kevin know." Then, right as she's about to hang up the phone, she hears this broomstick that she had just been using that was propped up against the workbench where the Dybbuk box was placed fall over onto the floor. Now she knows something is wrong because she knows that broomstick was set up in a way that it was not going to fall over without someone pushing it over, and there is no one else in the entire building with her that could have done it. After hearing this, she quickly tells Geneva, "Hey, look, sorry, but I gotta go." And the feeling that she had in the pit of her stomach that something was wrong and she just wasn't alone down there was only getting amplified to be worse and worse. She turns the lights off on the work desk lamp, and now the basement is completely pitch black because she had just turned off every light source. But before she can even fully process what had just happened with the broom, she hears something else moving deeper in the basement, as if someone is walking around down there. Now, Jane is somewhat freaked out at this point, but she's thinking that she needs to go back into the depths of this basement to investigate just in case someone had got in, knowing full well, though, that there's really no way anyone else could have been down there with her. She was just by the stairs, which were the only entrance to the basement, so no one could have snuck past her, even if they had somehow gotten through. The only person with a key to the shop is Kevin, and he wasn't supposed to be back for quite some time. So unless it was him, there's really no other way that anyone could get into the basement, and Kevin definitely could not have snuck past her that easily. But she knows what she just heard, and she is not ready to question her sanity just yet. So Jane, being absolutely certain that no one else could possibly be downstairs with her in this basement, starts investigating the cause of this sound. She starts looking up and down the rows of shelves for whatever could have possibly caused this noise, and hoping to see Kevin down there somewhere, or just a person in general, so she at least knows that she's not going crazy. She begins to search of her basement, and just in case maybe she had forgotten to lock the shop door, someone really had managed to get in and sneak past her, she yells out, "Hey, we're not open yet, you can't be down here." But no one yells back at her. Again, she yells out, "Hello, we're not open yet." Now, finding herself deep into this huge basement, surrounded by shelves and inventory, she has yet to have found anybody. No one's sneaking in, no sneaky customers at all, or Kevin. Then suddenly, out of this instinctual feeling she has, as though someone is behind her, she quickly turns around, and the light that she literally just switched off on the workbench had suddenly turned back on again. But before Jane even has time to process what she had just saw, she hears glass breaking from another part of the basement. At this point, Jane is just completely terrified. She knows something is wrong, she knows that there is no one else that could possibly be down there with her, but she's just praying that maybe someone had snuck past her and is messing with her and playing hide and seek. However, at this point, she knows full well that's not true. Continuing her investigation and going deeper into the basement, she's walking past these shelves when suddenly another glass item falls off another shelf that she's walking past and shatters. Only this time it happened right in front of her and she witnessed it. Nobody pushed it. Then, continuing to walk a couple more feet past where the glass had just fallen from in the same row of shelves, immediately a wooden chair falls off from the shelf across from that shelf, where the one that the glass had just fallen from. Jane is now beyond panicking, and now she is just having seen these events unfold right before her eyes. She immediately starts running back to the phone and tries to call Kevin. The lights in this basement are now flickering on and off. She's holding the phone to her ear, begging Kevin to please just pick up the phone. "I need help." Finally, Kevin answers the phone. Jane frantically starts trying to explain to Kevin what is going on, that someone is in the basement with her, messing with the lights and throwing inventory off of all the shelves, and Kevin responds with, "Jane, I can barely hear you. There's someone in the store?" Jane was yelling, when are you going to get back here? I need help. Something is happening down in the basement. Things are breaking, being thrown off of shelves. The lights are turning on and off by themselves. I'm so scared. Jane screams to Kevin with raw fear riddled in her voice. In the background, glass and antiques are just being smashed and tossed off shelves. Jane would later describe it as if someone was running through the basement with a baseball bat, just smashing everything. Kevin can hear all of this happening in the background, and again he asks, "Is someone down there with you?" And Jane tells him, "No, that's not it. No one is down here with me. Just please get back right away." And Kevin, with his heart now racing, believing that someone was in the shop, tells Jane, "Look, Jane, call the police immediately. Jane, Jane!" And he was yelling at her, hoping that she would hear him calling her name and telling her to call the police, but the phone suddenly just cuts right off, and Kevin, now thinking that Jane and his shop are both in serious danger, rushes right back to the antique store as fast as he possibly can. Kevin is just thinking this must be someone that really has some bad intent that broke in either to steal something or worse, to harm Jane. All he knew is that it was a bad situation and he had to put a stop to it. Jane is still down in the basement, and the activity has just kicked up into overdrive. The lights are turning on and off, glass is smashing left and right, pieces of furniture just flying all around off the shelves, narrowly missing Jane, and she is in tears just not knowing what to do. She tries to run up the stairs to the basement door and escape, but somehow the wrought iron gate door to the basement just closes on its own right in front of her as she's trying to head towards it and get out, and the door just locks itself. This wrought iron gate only locks and unlocks from the outside, and Jane did not have a key to this door either way, so she knew that she hadn't locked it, and she just saw whatever was doing this close the door in her face. Something had intentionally just trapped her down in the basement with whatever it was that was causing all of this mayhem. And Jane, now panicking and in tears, starts to think to herself, "Oh my god, I'm going to die down here, and there's no one that's coming to save me." A few minutes of driving like a madman later, though, Kevin finally gets back to the shop, not knowing what to expect, and as he's looking through the upper storefront, he sees that nothing is out of place. However, Jane was not up there, and once he gets to the back of the shop where the door to the basement was, he is just really confused because the wrought iron gate door to the basement had been closed and locked. Kevin immediately is thinking to himself that this is really strange because he's the only one with the key and he hadn't locked it. Kevin now quickly unlocks the gate and yells out, "Jane, it's Kevin! Where are you?" Kevin gets no response, so he grabs a flashlight and he starts looking around, and it's then that he notices the huge mess of glass and furniture that's just been thrown all over the place. He sees all of the light bulbs in the basement have been broken. All 10 of these 4-foot long fluorescent fixtures Every single one of them was on the floor completely shattered. Finally, Kevin starts making his way through this dark basement with only the light of his flashlight, and as if it were a jump scare out of a horror movie, Jane pops up in front of him, silent and in tears. Kevin knows Jane is not the kind of person who cries, so this is definitely out of the ordinary for her. She had just been standing there, unable to move, not saying anything, and when Kevin shined the flashlight in her face, it was like it had unfroze her from the strange state of paralysis that she was in. Freeing her from her trance, Jane just yells out, "F you, Kevin!" and starts walking away towards the exit in a huff. Kevin yells out to her, "Wait, Jane, come back here, Jane!" But she ignores him and proceeds to leave the basement, never to come back. Jane, understandably, was just overwhelmed with this feeling that she had to get out of there. Kevin, knowing the door was locked and that there was no other exits or entrances to this basement, not even so much as a crawl space, and Jane being the only one that was down there, immediately thinks to himself, this must have been Jane's fault. Who else could it have been, he thought. Well, there is no one else down here but her. Whoever had done this had to still be down here because Kevin had just unlocked the gate and there's no other way anyone else could have gotten in. Kevin had no other choice that day but to place the blame on Jane, and as sorry as he was that he upset her, in his mind he had no other choice but to fire her. So that day, Jane lost her job over something that wasn't even her fault, and with that terrible chain of events that's now been set in motion, this curse of the old wine cabinet had officially begun. Kevin hadn't realized it just yet, but opening the Dybbuk box was the worst mistake that he could have possibly made. Still, something drew Kevin over to his workbench where the Dybbuk box sat, open, with his flashlight shining upon it. He found himself simply staring at it for a moment, unsure as to why. Now, Kevin's mom's birthday was on October 28th, and it was coming up soon. He was planning to go have lunch with her and do some other stuff, and this was not long after the incident with Jane. And on that day, Kevin had realized that he had not yet got his mother a birthday present. So as a last-minute decision, he thinks, well, I have that old wine cabinet, and I doubt I'm going to get much for it in the shop. And I know it's an unusual present, but what the heck, I'm sure my mother won't mind it, and maybe she'll get some sort of use out of it. So his mother comes down to the shop that day, quite early, before it was even open yet, and there was this small little display area with furniture that he told his mother to take a seat at, and he just told his mother, hold on, I'll be right back, I have a somewhat unusual present for you. His mother didn't think much of this. She'd been used to receiving unusual presents in the past from her husband her whole life. Every year, he would get her a plaid jacket, knowing that she absolutely hated plaid, and that she was just going to return it to the store and get something she actually liked. So when Kevin brought this small wine cabinet up to her, she really didn't think much of it aside from, yeah, it's unusual, but that's about it. It isn't like she hated it or anything. I mean, it was a gift from her son. She just thought it was an odd choice of present. So Kevin sits this wine cabinet down in front of her, and one of Kevin's employees then comes over to him and says, hey Kevin, you have a phone call downstairs. Sorry Ma, I'll be right back, I have to go take this call, he tells her, and his mother, now sitting there alone with the box, is just staring at it. And she gets this strange feeling as though the box is just looking back at her right into her soul in this unsettling sort of way. His mother, now by herself, then gets up out of her seat and goes over to the box and begins to look it over. Eventually, after inspecting the outside of the box for a minute, the doors just begin to open on their own, and it was like a cold breeze that just flew out of the box and consumed her from the inside. It just felt like pure evil. The next thing she knows, she's sitting back down in her seat, staring at the Dybbuk box with the doors open, and she gets this strange feeling starting to come over her on top of the already unsettling feeling she had before. She was now paralyzed by some sort of unseen fear, and couldn't run away or get back up to close the doors to the box. She knew that what she was feeling right now was not good. Her mouth began to contort, her cheeks sagged, her right eye started to pocket, and at that moment, she knew she was having a stroke. Kevin's employees see this happening, and immediately they start to yell for him. They say, Kevin, get back upstairs. Something's happening to your mother. Kevin's mother couldn't speak at all. All she could think was, am I going to die here? Kevin's downstairs. Am I going to die before I get to see my son again? Kevin gets back up to his mother, and she's frozen and unable to move. They called an ambulance, and as the paramedics were coming in to take Kevin's mother to the hospital, Kevin was looking at his mother's face and just saw horror in her eyes. She was moving her eyes back and forth from Kevin to the box like this, like just trying to tell Kevin the only way that she could, that the box was the cause of all this, and she needed him to get rid of it before the same thing happens to him. She had to find a way to protect him from the evil box that he had brought into his life before it killed him and all of his loved ones, because if it can do this to her, it could definitely do the same thing to Kevin. At this point, Kevin's realizing that there really is something wrong with this box, and he probably should have picked a better gift, maybe taken a little bit more time in choosing it. But he didn't yet realize up until now just how evil this box was, and that the story of it being a Dybbuk box was actually true, and that the box did indeed contain powers beyond what Kevin could possibly have comprehended. Kevin had never imagined that it could be anything other than what it was, just a small wine cabinet. Dybbuks aren't real after all, they're just a story you tell to children, aren't they? Everything started to come together for Kevin, with atrocity after atrocity occurring, and the one factor that remained the same behind all of these things was the presence of this wine cabinet. At this point, Kevin knew the box had to go. So, Kevin throws it up in his shop and tries to sell it. A few days later, he would succeed. An older couple came in and they purchased the box from him. Kevin really didn't want to think anything more about it. He was just glad to see the box gone so that he could get back to his normal life and focus on more important matters. However, a few days later, Kevin would find the box had been returned to his shop, sitting behind the front door with a handwritten note on it from the couple that had purchased it. The note said, in quote, "This box has an odd darkness about it." At this point, Kevin is realizing this box is not going to be gotten rid of so easily. It was as though the box had chosen him. It was not going to leave him alone. So, his next step was to take it to this old storage shed that he had out back in his yard and lock it up there until he could figure out what to do with it. Soon after doing this, Kevin began to have these lucid dreams that felt just beyond real. He would go to sleep at night, and the dreams would play out in the same way every time. Kevin would be with someone that he trusted in the dream in a very nice and pleasant setting, and everything would be going great. They would be walking, and then suddenly the person he was with would just begin to disappear, and this gruesome, evil-looking old hag would take their place. Unable to move in the dream, the hag would just start beating the living crap out of Kevin, and he could feel every strike on his body in the dream as if he were wide awake. When he would finally wake up, he would go look in the mirror, and his body would just be covered in marks and bruises where this old hag had been beating on him in the dream. Kevin was in disbelief, thinking this just is not possible, but it quickly got to the point where this was happening every single night, and Kevin knew, he just knew that the Dybbuk box was causing all of this, and no matter what he did, no matter what he thought about before falling asleep, he just knew that this was going to continue to keep happening to him. He knew the box was a cursed object at this point, it needed to go, and there was something very, very wrong with it. And after thinking of some ways that he could probably get rid of the box, he would come across an unlikely solution. Just throw it on eBay. So this is exactly what Kevin would do. He listed it up and called it the Dybbuk box in the main heading, and in the description, Kevin described the box as a haunted Jewish wine cabinet, and he definitely was not going to sell it without disclosing everything that he thought had been happening to him since he purchased the box. He knew that doing so would not only help the box find its way into someone's hands that knew about the occult and could actually do something to dispose of this box properly, but it would also prevent them from being able to just return the box to him when the box would no doubt go on to cause havoc in their lives. With eBay, if you list an item and place in the description every detail about the box, including things such as horrors that the box was capable of causing, a buyer cannot simply just return it, since the seller can then argue that the information was disclosed on the listing when the person that bought it purchased it, and eBay would not force the seller to accept that return, since it's the buyer's responsibility to read the full description and understand what it is they're making a commitment to purchase before they even buy it. So in reality, this really was the smartest thing that Kevin could have done with that box. And crazily enough, there was actually a ton of interest in it. In May of 2003, a man from Kirksville, Missouri named Brian Grubbs would find his roommate at college named Sam looking at this listing on eBay for a haunted box. Both he and Sam were very interested in the paranormal and the occult, and were interested in haunted items, hoping that maybe they could purchase something and experience the paranormal for themselves. Brian asked what he was looking at, and Sam told him it's called a Dybbuk box, and he explained how the owner, Kevin, was experiencing very terrible nightmares and that it had caused his mother to have a stroke, among other things. And it's all there in this incredibly long description of everything that had transpired while Kevin had owned the box. Sam asked Brian if he wanted to go in on buying this box with him so that they could check it out for themselves, and Brian was interested in it but said no because he really didn't want to spend money on something that could be fake. Kevin at this time was surprised at just how much interest there actually was in the box, because he had sold a lot of stuff on eBay before, but he had never had 7,500 people watching a single item before. In Kevin's words, 7,500 people is a lot of people to watch a small wine cabinet sell. 3 weeks later, in the middle of June, Brian had come home for lunch, and as soon as he walks into the living room, he was instantly just consumed by this overwhelming stench of urine. There was packing supplies and pieces of boxes just thrown all over the floor, and he's thinking, who made this mess and who the heck urinated in my living room? He goes out to the kitchen to find the Dybbuk box sitting there on the kitchen table. Just like with Kevin's mother, the box was sitting there staring at him, and he was staring back at the box as Sam pops up behind it and says, "Say hi to our new roommate." Brian was just thinking in his head, I cannot believe Sam actually bought the Dybbuk box. Once he got over the fact that Sam had actually purchased the box, he just thinks it's absolutely hilarious, and he purchased this thing completely knowing full well it could have been fake. Brian really just did not believe that this thing was actually haunted. That would soon change. Sam was super curious about the box, and Brian asked him, now that we got it, what do we do with it? Sam tells Brian that he's going to go to sleep with it, curious to see if he would get the same atrocious nightmares of the old hag that Kevin had gotten. Sam had written down on his computer a week and a half later that he had been sleeping with the Dybbuk box next to his bed for a week and a half now and had yet to have any bad dreams. There was no old hag causing him any nightmares whatsoever. But at a party one night, when they left the box sitting out on the table and Sam was explaining to people what it was and how he had bought it on eBay for $140, they would just randomly tell people that asked about it that it was cursed and you may now have nightmares for years to come from just being around it, more as a joke. They saw it as a novelty and a good focus for the party. Finally, Sam yelled out, "May I have everyone's attention, please? The time has finally come to open the box." Some of the girls at the party were disturbed by the fact that this was a potentially haunted artifact, but Sam really didn't care. He just proceeds to open the box anyway, and this was when things finally started to happen. Brian and Sam had yet to open the box up until this point. They had no idea what they were in for by opening this cursed wine cabinet. With the attention of the whole party, Sam is now opening the box and initially nothing happens, but soon after the party, things began to change. They initially started to notice some unusual things happening with the electronics in their house. The toaster would stop working. The lights in the house all began to flicker and blow. Sam's laptop inexplicably crashed. The hard drive just failed randomly. The internet stopped working. And so because of this, they had to go over to their friends' houses to use their computers to do schoolwork. Even their Xbox just stopped working altogether. One morning, Brian was walking out of his room, and there was this one roommate whose room was next to Brian's. And as he walked out at the same time as Brian, when he saw him, he just looked awful. His face was empty. His face was just pale. His eyes were bloodshot to the point that it almost looked like they were bleeding, and he just overall did not look well. Brian then goes out to the living room where the Dybbuk box was sitting, and there were these bugs just swarming all over the place. And the main thing that these bugs were attracted to was the Dybbuk box. The majority of them were actually swarming the Dybbuk box. These roaches that randomly showed up now would be in the kitchen, the bathrooms, the sink. They would just be all over the place, the walls, the mirrors, around the toilet, but the box was always by far the most infested thing in the house. It was like they were drawn to it, like an attraction. Over the summer, Sam became less and less inclusive, and Brian and everyone else began to see him less and less, and Sam would then go on to document that he was seeing figures out of his peripheral vision, but most disturbing of all to Sam, his hair had just started beginning to fall out. Sam chalked it up to maybe being stress. He didn't know, but in the back of all of their minds, they all knew that the box was the true cause of all of these plagues that had befallen them. At this point, Sam decided he really did not want this box anymore. So, Sam did exactly as Kevin had done. He threw the box up on eBay and added everything that had happened to him to the description, as well as Kevin's original title and description, in the hopes of getting rid of it. And luckily he did, for more than what he actually bought it for. In fact, it was double what he bought it for. He sold it for $280. The box ended up being purchased by a director in a medical museum named Jason Haxton. He took an interest in this box as he had with other items in the past, seeing it as a puzzle that he could solve, and no bids had been made yet, so he threw in a bid price of $50 to get started. Then out of nowhere, the bid price quickly skyrocketed, and Jason was absolutely positive that he had to buy this box. So when the price went up, he thought, well, Sam had bought it and paid a price of $140, so I'll put in a bid at double for $280, which is what he would then end up having to pay for the box at the last second of the eBay auction. Jason was very excited with his new purchase, and all Sam could think about is, why on earth would someone spend that kind of money on something that could ruin their entire life? When Jason actually received the box, all of the lights were off and everything was closed down on his museum's campus that day. Jason was aware of everything that had happened to Kevin and to Brian and Sam as well, and he thought it sounded more like infection, spontaneous illness, and hallucinations, that maybe there was something to the box causing all these medical conditions. He wanted to find out the answer to what it was about the box that did this to people, so he could maybe use whatever the cause was to help find an answer to overcome what seemed to be ill health effects that the box was causing. To Jason, it seemed like a good idea to put on white gloves and examine the box just in case there were any contaminants present that could possibly get him sick in some way as well. Jason dimmed the lights and turned on a black light, and he saw a bit of a glow from wax that had been dripped on the box. It made Jason realize that this box was likely used ritually for something, and this then prompted Jason to open the box so he could take a look at what was inside. The moment before opening the doors, he felt a strange feeling come over him that just made him wonder if he was making a major mistake. Knowing what happened to everyone else, he couldn't help but think, what was going to happen after I opened this? What if there really is something more to this box? Jason proceeds to forensically examine this box, and when he gets inside, he finds all of the same items that it contained before inside of plastic bags. And in Jason's mind, if this box really was haunted, he was expecting the horrible plagues to start happening right away after opening it. He had not realized that this box would take its time before torturing him, just as it had done with all of the others that had owned it before him. When he's looking over the contents of the box, Jason is just thinking, okay, maybe this is just a historical artifact. This opinion, though, would soon change. Within days of the Dybbuk box being in the museum, the same thing that had occurred with Sam and Brian began to happen to Jason, and the computers in the museum all just started crashing, and the museum just was losing a ton of valuable information, and several weeks of work was now gone just like that. This was quickly followed by the light bulbs, and the strangest part was that it was only the bulbs around the Dybbuk box that were going out. After these things seemed to start, it only got worse and worse. The staff became tired and ill. They made it clear that either the box had to go or they would be finding new jobs, which prompted Jason to, with no choice left now, take the box home out of the museum and put it somewhere in his house. Jason really did not want to take this box back to his home, but he felt he had no other choice. There was really no other place he could have put it, and he had no other way to immediately dispose of it. The first night that Jason has the box at his house, he hardly sleeps, and when he does, he has these repetitive dreams of the ugly old woman, the same one that Kevin saw in his dreams, and the face of it would just dissolve into some gruesome looking injuries as if the flesh was just being torn off of its face. Jason would wake up in horror only to go back to sleep and have the same repetitive nightmare over and over again. When Jason woke up that morning, he immediately went into the bathroom, and feeling happy to finally be awake and stop having to deal with these dreams, he looks in the mirror and realizes that the nightmares are far from over. They had only just begun. He sees his face in the mirror, and looking on in shock for a moment, he sees his eyes are completely bloodshot to the point they look like they were bleeding. Jason thinks to himself, what the heck could I have done to myself in my sleep to cause this? How is this possible? His wife would come into the bathroom behind him and ask Jason, what's wrong with your eyes? In shock. All Jason could do was tell his wife, I don't know. Things would only get even worse from this point. It wouldn't be long before one evening Jason was watching television with his very young son, and randomly his son whispers over to him and says, Dad, hey Dad. Jason responded and said, what is it, son? And in a low whisper, his son asks him, Dad, what is that? Jason said to him, what are you talking about? His son then just tells him to look over top of him, and Jason sees this strange black mass that looks as though it were a humanoid figure made of black flames just standing over his son, and quickly the young boy jumps into Jason's arms. His son is looking at it in his dad's arms going, what is that? And Jason could see a look of true terror in his son's eyes. And when he does this, the apparition that has now left them both speechless and afraid simply starts to dematerialize into what looks like black smoke, and it vanishes up into the ceiling from behind the chair that his son had just been sitting in. Jason now knows this thing is willing to do much more than just harm him. It's willing to put his family through the same exact torture that it was putting him through as well. This box was ruining Jason's life. At this point, Jason had already attempted to look for answers from the scientific side of things, and he had failed to do so. And he knew now that if he was going to get rid of this thing and have it leave them alone, he had no choice other than to close and seal the box that he had opened and get whatever was once contained in it back into the box yet again. Jason had an old shed on his rental property that he owned that had a cellar, and just like Kevin did, he brought it to the shed. He put it down in the cellar thinking that this was the perfect place to seal this box away. As Jason is now finishing up putting this box in the cellar, the sound of wind suddenly begins to fill his ears, and it starts filling up the space. There was nothing that could have created this, and they were completely sealed in space underground, yet somehow there was this powerful wind just blowing all around the cellar, which started as soon as Jason had brought the box down there. Jason then left and locked the door to the basement and decided he was done with it. He had washed his hands of this box, and that would be the end of it. It's out of his house, and now the problem should go away, right? Or so he thought. Jason now felt that he needed to cleanse himself of any attachments that may have stuck themselves to him from the box, and he goes and decides, I'm going to attempt to wash myself clean of the evil from this box that's been plaguing my life and take a bath. Maybe that'll help. So he gets in the tub and something strange begins to happen. He ended up being pushed underneath the water for a second, and all of a sudden he felt as though something inside of his body was tearing. He begins to throw up, and what comes out was not vomit. Rather, it was this gel-like mucus, like I don't know how else to describe it other than maybe white ectoplasm. Something that had never been out of his body before was now in his hands. Unable to stop coughing, and with no explanation of what had just happened, Jason was in disbelief. But he knew something had just came out of him as though it was some sort of parasite-type entity that just tore itself from inside of him and exited his body. His wife was doing laundry a few moments before this and frantically comes to the bathroom door screaming, "Jason! Jason!" But it's not to see what all the commotion that Jason was causing in the bathroom was. His wife just continued to yell, "Jason, you need to look at this!" So Jason rushes to the bathroom door, he opens it, and she screams at him, "Jason, what is this?" She shows Jason her hands and wrists, and they are covered in blisters. Blisters that can only be described to look like poison ivy, but far worse. Her wrists were just covered in these blisters that had broken out with blood. They were all over her hands and wrists and just swelling up. Jason knew at this point he needed to get rid of this thing. He needed to finish what he started because it clearly was not done yet. He decided that he needed to find Kevin Mannis, the original owner of the Dybbuk box. Kevin would then receive a call in the middle of the night that night. Kevin answered the phone, but immediately he hung up on Jason. He wanted nothing to do with this box. He was having a problem that Kevin did not want to help solve, and Kevin was also scared that he might have to take the Dybbuk box back. Jason called back again and pleaded with Kevin, "Please do not hang up on me again. I need to talk to you about this. Please, this is very, very important." And shortly after starting the conversation with Kevin, Jason knew that he was no longer alone with this problem. Kevin did agree to work with him and help him to get this problem out of his life. And then Kevin would eventually go on to show up at the granddaughter of the original owner of the box's house. He knocked on the door, and when the young woman answered, he immediately began to try to ask about the box. But rather than help, the young woman simply cuts him off before he could even begin, and with a serious tone and expressionless face, she tells him, "I think you should leave." Kevin, realizing he was not going to get anywhere with this woman, begins to leave, and he made it maybe 15 steps before he heard what he thought was the young lady say to him, "I know exactly why you're here." But it wasn't the young woman. There was this little old lady now staring right through him. He walks back up to the house and begins to talk to her, and the lady introduces herself. She said, "My name is Sophie, the cousin of Habile, the woman that had just passed away and left the box with her estate that Kevin had purchased." Kevin is now intently listening to what this woman has to say. He hears her explain that she had lived with Habile back in Poland in World War II, and apparently at the time in Europe it was popular to have seances and play with games like Ouija boards. Habile had made actually what looked like a Ouija board one day out of a tablecloth, and on this tablecloth there were letters written on it, and they would then take a little pendant and hold it above the tablecloth and ask this supposed board questions, and wherever the pendulum would swing, they would write that letter down as part of a response from whatever it was that they were speaking with. The pendant would swing on its own, and it would either spell out a word or answer a question as they asked them. It was supposed to be all in good fun, but supposedly during the course of doing this, they felt like they actually managed to contact a spirit that actually began to ask them suspicious things. Like, this spirit said, "Could you please bring me over from the dark side?" And at this point, Sophie and her cousin were fairly confident that what they had managed to contact was not a spirit, but a Dybbuk. a dark and evil entity that would try to attach itself to one of their souls and use them as a vessel for possession and commit untold atrocities while using their bodies to do it. They ended up devising a ritual, though, where they would be able to bring this Dybbuk over from the other side and then trap it in a box. That's why Havale was so adamant that no one ever opened this box. But when Kevin bought the box and opened it up for the first time in his antique shop, he had released the evil entity onto not only himself, but also the rest of the world. After learning all of this information that Sophie had told Kevin, Jason contacts rabbis and starts asking what the best method is that he could use to seal the spirit away. After this, the Dybbuk box would then be sealed away by Jason for the next 5 years, keeping it in a military box buried underground on his 26-acre property in Missouri. The story would be made public, and a movie in 2012 called The Possession would be made about the box. It would remain sealed until finally Zach Bagans would one day get in contact with Jason after having heard the stories about this box, and Zach was interested in collecting this box and adding it to his haunted museum in Las Vegas. Jason willingly decided to bring the box to Zach, and the box now remains there till this day. Zach had touted the box as the centerpiece of his museum in a live stream in 2018 for Halloween, but he refused to open it due to technical difficulties at the time that he felt were being caused by the box while filming it on the live stream. He truly believed the box was causing his production to fall apart, and as such decided against opening the box. Then in 2021, during the height of the pandemic when the quarantine was going strong, Zach would film a special with Post Malone where he would finally actually open up the box. And aside from the evidence they supposedly filmed during this episode, there was one final thing that had occurred, but this wasn't to Zach Bagans, it was to Post Malone. Supposedly, only having went near the box because he was with Zach Bagans, who he considered an expert on the paranormal. Zach was actually touching the box at one point when Post Malone came over and grabbed his shoulder, effectively transferring the curse from the box to Zach to himself. And in the months that followed, tragedies would then befall Post Malone just as they had every other person that had owned the box. First, his private plane was forced to make an emergency landing after the tires blew off. Then, later, 3 armed robbers would target his home in San Francisco, or at least a home they believed was his house. And finally, while in his Rolls Royce one day, while his assistant was driving, he was involved in a very serious car accident, hitting another vehicle before hitting a fence and ending up in some nearby bushes. Luckily, there were no injuries, and the police would say that there was actually no alcohol involved with this crash. A string of bad luck that many people have connected to the Dybbuk box, including Post Malone himself, even going as far one time to say in a tweet, "I think God hates me." Whether you think this could be coincidence or the curse really did follow him home, there is certainly a truly long and unfortunate string of events that have followed this box everywhere it's gone. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave a like and a comment and subscribe with notifications on so you can see all of our future uploads. The box is still available to go see if you're interested. It's in Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, so if you're curious enough, go check it out. If you enjoyed this video, maybe click the video that should be popping up on screen right about now. And come on, you know you want to click it. It's an interesting one. Anyway, I'm MrLex, and I'll see you guys again next video.